My name's Laura, and for the majority of my life, I've dedicated myself to teaching Italian. By the time I reached 42, I had settled into a comfortable rhythm, my days filled with the sounds of classroom bells, chalky air, and the lively chatter of students. I believed I had everything under control until one afternoon things shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change, but more like a subtle spark that ignites when your gaze locks with someone across a crowded room, and you sense that something's about to change. It all began on a rainy afternoon in March. Marco's daughter, Isabella, was one of my private pupils. She was bright, enthusiastic, and always completed her assignments swiftly. On this particular day, as Isabella worked on an exercise, Marco arrived to pick her up. "Sorry for barging in," he said, awkwardly standing in the doorway. His hair was tousled, and raindrops clung to his coat. "No problem," I replied with a smile. "Isabella's just wrapping up." He leaned casually against the doorframe, his eyes observing us with approval. "She talks a lot about you. Says you make learning Italian enjoyable." I chuckled as I packed up my things. "I try my best. Italian is such a beautiful language. It deserves passion." "I can see that," Marco said, offering a small grin. "I'm Marco." "Laura," I answered, extending my hand. Isabella, eager to leave, chatted nonstop about the lesson and how she was looking forward to the next one. Marco gave her a warm smile before turning to me. "There's a community gathering this weekend. Food, music, very laid back. You should come, maybe share some of that Italian enthusiasm with us." I was taken off guard by the invitation but agreed. "Sounds like fun." "It's a date then, not a date, just a friendly get-together," he quickly clarified. I laughed. "Got it." At the gathering, while a band played old tunes and children ran around, Marco and I had the chance to chat more. He seemed open, his voice softening as he shared, "I'm a widower, raising Isabella and her brother, Matteo, on my own. Matteo's a handful, but he's a good kid." I nodded, my heart warming. "You've got a lot on your plate." "Yeah, but they make it worth it," Marco replied, poking at his food. In the following days, we met at cafes and went for walks in the park. During one of these walks, I met Matteo, a lively boy with his father's eyes and a contagious laugh. He showed me his sketches and asked questions about Italy, making me feel welcomed in an unexpected way. Eventually, Marco introduced me to his mother, Rosa. She was a strong-willed woman with a sharp tongue but a warm smile. "So, you're the one making my son smile again?" she asked, sizing me up. It's nice to see him with someone who can handle his cooking. Things between Marco and I progressed naturally. We grew closer, and before I knew it, I wasn't just his girlfriend anymore. I was becoming part of his family. Then the time came for me to move in. Packing up my life felt strange, but it also felt right. Marco and the kids helped me move, and we joked about finding room for all my books in the house. Marco even teased me about how many books I owned. "Better make room for a library in the backyard," I joked as we rearranged things. Matteo and Isabella were excited, offering to make space for my things. Matteo even suggested I place some of my books on his shelf, among his cars and comic books. "Thanks, Matteo. Maybe just a few. Leave room for your cars," I said, ruffling his hair. The real test came when I saw Rosa again, this time in the context of living together. She visited, scanning everything with a careful eye, but her tone was warm. "So, you're officially moving in?" "Yeah, Rosa," I replied, uncertain of how much of the house I could claim as mine. "Just don't forget, Marco likes his eggs over easy, not scrambled," she added with a wink. "I'll keep that in mind," I smiled, appreciating her blunt humor. Adjusting to life together wasn't without its bumps. Marco worked long hours, so I spent more time with Matteo and Isabella. I helped with homework, cooked meals, and gradually became part of their daily rhythm. It wasn't always easy. There were times I felt like an outsider, unsure of where I fit. But for every uncomfortable moment, there were dozens filled with laughter and shared experiences. One evening, Marco looked at me after a particularly exhausting day. You really make this place better." "I just want you all to feel like it's still your home," I said, resting my head on his shoulder. Becoming a stepmother was no easy feat. There were no clear instructions, no map to follow. But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the quiet hum of the house, I realized I had found my place. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't neat, but it was home. Things took a turn when Rosa suffered a stroke. We had spent so many days together, laughing and cooking, But now everything was different. Marco moved her into her house, and I took on the responsibility of caring for her. It felt like the right thing to do. She was family, after all. But as I became more involved in her care, Marco seemed to withdraw, and I couldn't ignore the widening gap between us. Caring for Rosa was exhausting. She needed help with almost everything, and I did it willingly. But the warmth of our previous conversations was gone, and my attempts to connect with her felt strained. "Did you add the basil to the sauce?" Rosa asked sharply, watching me closely from her wheelchair. "Yes, just like you showed me," I answered, trying to spark some warmth between us. But those moments of connection became rare. As the weeks went by, Marco and I spoke less and less. One evening, I finally asked, "Marco, we barely talk anymore. Is everything all right?" He paused for a moment before responding, his words heavy. "I'm just tired, Laura. It's been a lot to handle." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. He'd avoided looking at me, and the space between us seemed to grow larger. Years passed, and Rosa became a permanent fixture in the household, until her sudden death shattered the routine. The funeral was a blur, black attire, quiet expressions, and soft-spoken condolences. The real blow came later, during an argument when Marco's pent-up resentment finally spilled over. "You're just taking up space, Laura. I only tolerated you because you were useful. Look at you now. What good are you?" His words felt like sharp blows, leaving me speechless. "Marco, how can you say that after all this time?" "It's the truth, Laura. You were here for the kids and for my mother. That's all." He turned his back on me, dismissing me with a careless wave of his hand. The children, now grown, began showing their true colors. Isabella, once sweet and kind, became distant and harsh. "You really don't have anyone, do you, Laura? You're just here because we feel sorry for you," she sneered. Matteo didn't show any more kindness. "Why are you still hanging around? You're just wasting space," he would mutter whenever our paths crossed. Their words dug into me like knives. I felt alienated in the house I had once cared for. The family I had loved and nurtured now saw me as obsolete. One evening, while setting the table, Marco stormed in, visibly fuming. "Why do you still insist on pretending everything's fine, Laura? You know it's all a show," he snapped, tossing his keys onto the table. I held the fork in my trembling hand, trying to steady myself. "I don't understand, Marco. Why are you so angry with me? You were just a convenience, useful for a time, now just taking up space," he spat, rummaging through the fridge as if looking for an answer. Isabella and Matteo joined him, their faces reflecting the same disdain. Matteo grabbed a soda, his eyes mocking. "Yeah, Laura, maybe it's time you face it. You're like an old couch that should have been thrown out a long time ago." Isabella's laughter rang out, cruel and cold. "Seriously, Laura, even you must see it. You're just the leftovers now." Their cruelty stung like 1,000 cuts. I turned away, hiding the tears that were threatening to spill. "I cared for all of you. I loved you. How could you treat me like this?" Marco shrugged dismissively, as if my emotions meant nothing. "Love? That's a strong word for just doing your job, don't you think?" The rest of the dinner passed in silence, at least for me. Their words, leftovers, useless, outdated, echoed in my mind. It was clear that I had become nothing more than an unwanted guest who had overstayed her welcome. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my health began to deteriorate. My legs, which had once carried me through long days of teaching and housework, were now in constant pain. The doctors couldn't provide a clear diagnosis, only offering terms like chronic inflammation and potential degenerative issues, which essentially meant learn to live with it. This shift in my health hit me hard. Teaching at the private school I loved became impossible, and I had to quit, losing not just my income but a piece of my identity. At home, every step was an ordeal. Even the simplest tasks felt like monumental challenges. I felt trapped in my own body, and even worse, in a home where I was no longer wanted. Marco's reaction to my condition was nothing short of cold. One morning, after struggling to clear up breakfast dishes, wincing with each movement, he walked in. "Why are you even bothering to clean? You're just making things worse," he said, his voice sharp and dismissive. "I'm trying to help, Marco. It's not like I can sit around doing nothing," I replied, leaning on the counter for support. "Help? You're more of a burden now than anything else," he retorted, his words stinging deeper than the pain in my legs. Meanwhile, Marco and the kids spent money recklessly. New gadgets, designer clothes, all funded by the inheritance. Me? I got nothing, not that I expected anything. Their lavish spending was a slap in the face, a constant reminder of my place in their world. To make matters worse, they never let me forget that I was only there out of pity. "Don't get too comfortable, Laura," Marco would sneer. "You're just one argument away from being out on the street." Their words were like a prison, chaining me to a life of quiet despair. But one day, I stumbled upon a website for online language tutors. My heart skipped a beat as I realized I could teach Italian again, reconnecting with a part of myself I thought was lost. Excitedly, I created a profile, my fingers trembling with anticipation. "Experienced Italian teacher, tailored lessons with passion," I wrote. Before long, I booked my first session. The thrill of teaching, speaking Italian, engaging with students, it all flooded back, filling me with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Each day, when Marco and the kids were out, I transformed a corner of my room into a makeshift classroom. I started small, but word spread quickly. My schedule filled up, and soon I was teaching more and more. "You're really good at this, Laura," a student complimented me during a video call, boosting my confidence. As my reputation grew, so did my rates. For the first time in ages, I was making my own money, and more than Marco even. But I kept it quiet. If he or the kids found out, they'd undoubtedly try to sabotage it. One afternoon, after a particularly fulfilling session, I leaned back, feeling a sense of accomplishment. Marco came in earlier than usual and immediately eyed my setup: laptop, notebooks, Italian flags, and teaching materials strewn across the table. "What's all this?" he asked, suspicious. "I'm teaching," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm despite the butterflies in my stomach. "Teaching here?" he asked, clearly confused. "People from all over the world want to learn from me," I said proudly. "Turns out I'm pretty popular." Marco scoffed, unimpressed. "Just make sure this doesn't interfere with your chores." "It won't," I assured him, returning to my computer. He left, muttering under his breath. That night, as I lay in bed, a small smile crept onto my lips. Marco and his kids could spend their inheritance on fleeting pleasures. I was building something lasting, something all my own. My online teaching wasn't just a job. It was my lifeline, my escape. I was no longer just the downtrodden stepmother. I was Laura, the sought-after Italian tutor, building my own path and watching my finances grow. That evening at dinner, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Marco and the kids were unnervingly quiet as I served the meal, their eyes deliberately avoiding mine. Something was off, but I couldn't have predicted the words Marco was about to throw my way. Breaking the silence, Marco spoke with a frosty tone. "I got promoted at work," he said, not sparing a glance at anyone. "And I bought a new house." I froze, my spoon suspended in midair. "That's great. Congratulations," I said, although a knot tightened in my stomach. "Don't get too excited," Marco continued, his eyes locking onto mine. "You're not coming with us." I felt like I had been blindsided. "What do you mean?" "Exactly what I said," Marco snapped. "You're not part of the plan. You'll stay here. The kids and I are moving on. We need a fresh start." The words hit me like a hammer. Isabella snickered. "Yeah, who would want an old limping maid in a new house?" Matteo chimed in. "Consider yourself lucky we're not kicking you out tonight." I stared at them, the venom in their eyes cutting through me, my heart pounding in my chest. "And what about this house?" I whispered, barely able to speak. "It's sold," Marco answered, unfeeling. "New owners will take over in a month. Maybe you can find a shelter or something by then." Their laughter rang out, cruel and mocking. I sat there, stunned and shaking. This was the gratitude I got after years of love, care, and sacrifice. As their laughter subsided, I finally spoke, my voice steady but quiet. "I understand. I suppose there's nothing more to say." Marco shrugged, indifferent. "Guess not." I stood up, my legs unsteady but determined. I looked at each of them, their faces still glued to their plates, not a shred of remorse in sight. "Enjoy your meal," I said softly, before turning and walking out of the room. Once in my own room, the harsh reality set in. They were truly going to leave me behind. But oddly, as I sat there, a strange sense of relief washed over me. I was free from their cruelty. It wasn't the freedom I'd envisioned, but it was still freedom. The day I walked out, suitcase in hand, leaving Marco and the kids behind, I felt a mix of liberation and sadness. As I passed through the door, Marco's bitter words echoed behind me. "Hope you enjoy your flophouses, that's all you can afford," he jeered with a cruel laugh. Isabella and Matteo joined in. "Good riddance. Now we don't have to deal with your pathetic limping around the house." I didn't respond. What was the point? I knew by now that no amount of words would change their cruelty. Slamming the door behind me, I closed that painful chapter of my life. Moving into my secret apartment was like taking my first breath of fresh air. It was small, but it was mine. No judgment, no cruelty. Setting up my new space felt like therapy. I carefully arranged my books, set up a small desk by the window, and turned it into the perfect place for my online Italian lessons. I reveled in the peace, the calm. It was a silence born of tranquility, not tension. The divorce was finalized shortly after. Standing in the courtroom, I faced Marco and the kids for the last time. They smirked, still as arrogant as ever. When offered alimony, I declined. "I want nothing from him, not now, not ever," I said firmly. "He and his children are strangers to me." Word of my tutoring spread quickly, and soon my schedule was packed with students from all corners of the globe. The money flowed in, and I was thriving. It was my victory, and I was proud. One evening, while sipping tea at my kitchen table, an old friend called with some news. "Have you heard about Marco?" she asked, her voice full of disbelief. "He's living in a fancy new house, but he's already burning through cash like there's no tomorrow." I couldn't help but smile. "No surprise there," I said. "He never planned for the future." Marco's reckless spending didn't shock me, but it gave me the perfect opportunity. During the final months of our marriage, I had secretly recorded their cruel words, just for my own records. Now, I sent the recordings anonymously to Marco's boss, knowing the company had strict harassment policies. It wasn't long before the consequences caught up with Marco. One evening, my phone rang. Marco's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated but answered. "Laura, what have you done?" Marco's voice was a mix of rage and panic. "You've heard, haven't you? It sounds like your company didn't appreciate how you treat people," I replied, calm and composed. "You ruined me," Marco shouted. "They demoted me, cut my salary. How am I supposed to pay the mortgage now?" His desperation was clear. In the background, I could hear Isabella and Matteo still fuming. "This is all your fault, Laura. You're going to pay for this," Matteo yelled. I couldn't help but laugh. It felt good. "Looks like you're headed for a flop house." "Isn't that ironic?" I said. "Please, Laura, help us. We're sorry. We didn't mean it," Marco begged, his voice filled with desperation. "You don't get it, Marco," I replied coldly. "I don't want your apologies or help. I'm done being your maid, your punching bag." "But we're family," he pleaded, grasping at any excuse. "We were family," I corrected him sharply. "Goodbye, Marco." I hung up, blocking his number along with Isabella's and Matteo's. It felt like a weight had been lifted. I had closure. A few weeks later, I heard from mutual acquaintances that Marco and his kids had been evicted for failing to pay the mortgage. They were forced to downsize, and the kids, now adults, had to find jobs to survive. The thought of them scrambling while I was planning to buy my own house made me smile smugly. It wasn't revenge, it was justice, showing them that I was no longer someone they could walk all over. I turned back to my computer, to a message from a student thanking me for my lessons. It warmed my heart. I had found my purpose, and no one could take that away from me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video. Stay stunned.